I don't see color. I was raised to treat everyone the same. Race has no meaning to me. Do these statements sound familiar? Or maybe you've even said them yourself and with good intention. All of these statements I would classify as examples of a harmful ideology called colorblind racism. And they can be harmful both on an individual level and a systemic level. So I thought we would unpack together why they are harmful both individually, on an individual level and a systemic level. So on an individual level, for one, this can be problematic because we all are humans, and in fact we do see color, and color has social consequences and meaning, skin color. And number two, if one is making these statements in response to another person sharing an experience in which they themselves have experienced racial discrimination, responding in this way is essentially dismissing their experience and dismissing the very real impact that systemic racism has on individuals and on a systemic level today. But I really want to focus some time on the systemic level, because I'm sure a lot of you, especially in the last 6 or so months, have heard a lot more public discourse anyways around systemic racism. So let's unpack why this ideology of colorblind racism is harmful at a systemic level. First, I thought I'd just share with you a definition of what a colorblind racism is. It is an ideology that believes that only the absence of accounting for race will bring racial equality. It rejects all racial categorizations and policies and record keeping and makes no distinctions based on race. And it relies on the idea that race no longer matters. And it rejects policies that have been designed to address a legacy of systemic racism. So let's use a specific example with recent news that's going on with the recent confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett as a Supreme Court justice. A lot of critics with her confirmation have expressed a fear that her confirmation as Supreme Court justice has the potential, a risk of turning back anti-discriminatory laws and policies that have been put into place. One specifically I wanted to talk about today is the Voting Rights Act. So we'll dig a little bit deeper before I get into Voting Rights Act. So during her confirmation hearing, Judge Amy Coney Barrett was asked if she agreed with a late justice's opinion and belief that the Voting Rights Act was a racial entitlement. And while she declined to answer that question specifically, she has said on multiple occasions that she supports this justice's philosophy, that his philosophy is hers as well. So going to a specific section within the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, which required states and localities with a history of discriminatory voting practices to submit any changes to the federal government for pre-clearance before implementing them. And practices that were retrogressive, which just essentially means policies that would put voters of color in a worse position than the past, were prohibited by such policies as this Section 5 in the Voting Rights Act. In essence, they were or are anti-racist policies. They stopped discrimination before it would start. So critics of the Voting Rights Act have said that it provides special treatment to Black voters and other people of color. So that belief, that ideology, that a Voting Rights Act, which was one of the effective civil rights laws in the history of our country, one to believe that a law such as that actually favors Black people is an example of colorblind racism or a colorblind ideology. And I wanted to read an excerpt from an article that I think does a good job of breaking this down even more. And I just thought that they articulated it in a way that I couldn't possibly articulate in such a short amount of time. So it says, end quote, and I will put a link to this article. In 1987, the Reagan Justice Department lamented that Section 5 was being used to provide a guaranteed minimum floor for minority electoral success. In Shelby County, before the case reached the Supreme Court, a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals argued that Section 5 mandates race-conscious decision-making, inconsistent with the Reconstruction Amendment's commitment to non-discrimination. referring, without irony, to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which were ratified to guarantee Black freedom and equality. A number of groups that made this argument in front of the Supreme Court. The Libertarian Cato Institute, for example, claimed that Section 5 denied equal protection of the laws by providing legal guarantees to some racial groups that it denies to others. The Supreme Court ultimately ended federal preclearance, so that's the Section 5. They ended Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act 5-4 by striking down the coverage formula that determined which jurisdictions were subject to review. Chief Justice John Roberts concluded the formula no longer spoke to current conditions. Our country has changed, end quote. So this notion that America is somehow essentially a post-racial society and that focusing on race will only take us backward, not forward, is an example of a colorblind ideology. And I hope that this short video gave you an example or gave a little bit more explanation to why this ideology is quite harmful both on an individual and a systemic level.